and welcome to the first episode of the Heather Simcoe podcast, where we talk about all things self-improvement, wellness, nutrition, life hacks, and empowering each other to be the best versions of ourselves. Today, I'm going to talk about how judgment nearly killed me. You're too pretty to have problems. Nearly killed me. First, I'd like to begin at the start of my story, being born and raised in California. My parents were teenagers when they had me. They got married. That didn't last very long. And I ended up moving around an awful lot before I was even 4 years old. My dad eventually moved in with my grandparents and married my stepmother from next door, who was also very young, only 14 years older than me. And so I had basically children raising children, and they had their own baggage while they were raising me as well. And the summary of my childhood from that point was not seeing my biological mother from the time I was 4 until I was 21, and then a Cinderella-like upbringing with 2 half-brothers, cleaning, all of the things that come with that lifestyle. And being told most of my life that I wasn't wanted, that I wasn't enough, feeling less than, and basically not loving myself for most of my life. I got to the point in high school where, after being very athletic my freshman year of high school, I had a best friend who had spent the summer with her dad, sent me a letter back when we used to write letters to one another before emails. Yes, the dark ages before technology. Only super rich people had email at that point, or the dial-up, which was harder than anything else to wait for. Had written a letter, and my stepmother had seen a part of the letter which called her a very nasty name, to which I was no longer allowed to see that friend any longer. And at that point, I decided to eat my feelings, becoming severely overweight, gaining, I think, 40 to 50 pounds in the summer between my freshman and sophomore year of high school. Now, growing up, I initially wanted to be a pediatrician. I loved kids. I was a babysitter. From the time I was 11 years on, I was basically self-employed, the main babysitter for the entire neighborhood, where it was first come, first serve. I got to go on vacations with families and had a very cool experience in that sense. But high school, like most people, was actually, I enjoyed it to the point at which it was my escape from home. I dove into academics, being good enough in school, and being surrounded by lots of, I'll call them nerds. I was a nerd in Silicon Valley whose parents were engineers from IBM, doctors, and the standards were very high for academics. And so I dove into my academics, realizing that the best way out was forward in getting into college. Although depression set in, being overweight, one of the only few overweight girls in high school, and the high school that I went to at least, there were girls who were on the cover of the magazines at the grocery store. So the standards were pretty high for what was typically beautiful. And I was very much out of place. Clueless being the #1 movie at the time, now a cult classic, 30 years ago. But trying to fit in clothes like that when you're overweight was not the cutest thing. So I basically ate most of my feelings, very suicidal, and trying to vacillate between offing myself or pushing through. And one of the only reasons, actually, that I didn't follow through on that was I didn't want to upset my teachers or the kids that I babysat, and realized the light was close enough at the end of the tunnel to get to college. So fast forward, senior year, we go visit relatives, my stepmother's relatives in New York in the fall. And how do you not fall in love with New York? Well, the leaves are changing. And we realized New York is the place to be. So we decided that we're going to move. I applied to colleges both in California and in New York. I could have stayed in California. At the time, after giving up my dream of becoming a pediatrician, hitting AP biology and realizing this is not for me, and enough competition from classmates that were far more proficient in that area than myself. At the time, my stepmother convinced me to become a school teacher. I did love kids. And being a teacher in California versus New York were two totally different incomes. And where I was at home, I was not going to live at home forever with my family. And being a teacher was not a forward option in California. So we picked up, moved cross country, drove 3,000 miles, a U-Haul truck, 2 dogs, 2 younger brothers, as we physically mapped out on a map, again, dark ages, before Google Maps, all the way across country, where I landed in upstate New York. And moving in, there was not even a bedroom for me right then. And within a few months of moving to New York, started college. I had no driver's license, no car, no job, a few $100s to my name, and 3 weeks into the school year of still being treated like a high school kid in college, I made the move to just move into the dorms and out of the house, effectively at 17 years old with a few $100s in my bank account, on my own. And yes, I would go home and see my family from time to time, but again, no car, no driver's license. After a while, that was no longer an option. They moved and there was no bedroom for me. And so I had to get jobs on campus so I could live on campus during breaks. And I worked at the bookstore because I got a discount on books and made money to buy them at the same time. Bootstrapping my way through college. Again, no driver's license, no car, Hudson Valley, where you can't get a job if you don't have a car and you can't get a car if you don't have a job. So I had to make use with what tools there were on campus and become extremely innovative. And so luckily, growing up in a family of self-employed, my dad was a entrepreneur and they owned their own business their whole life, which I had helped with from the time I was 12. That was not new to me. I'm a problem solver. I was like, okay, fine. This is a problem. This is how I'm going to solve it. And so I figured out how to stay in college, in the dorms, 3 to 4 jobs on campus at a time, whatever it took to stay in college. And my best friend at the time, who would become my sister-in-law, had a car. And so I'd go home to her house for a home-cooked meal, and she'd come to the dorm for some freedom. And it was a wonderful symbiotic relationship, who eventually would introduce me to my now husband of 23 years and together for 26. And being overweight, homeless, no car, no driver's license, I was not a high commodity of somebody who wanted to date. And I couldn't believe that this guy who looked like he walked out of the movie Fight Club, looking like Brad Pitt, had any interest in dating me. And luckily he did. My sister-in-law said, "Oh, my brother's leaving a relationship." And I go, "Oh, really? He thinks you're cute." "Oh, really?" And the rest was history. And so, again, 26 years later, we're still together. We've had our ups and downs, but we are still kicking it and still together. And so another thing about me is, after diving into food, which was generally my first drug of choice, if you can't tell me who I can be friends with, you can't tell me how much I can eat. And those were the seeds of addiction that I did not know would end up bringing me up and down on many roller coasters in my life, of not just the weight roller coaster, self-love, body dysmorphia, self-image, and addiction overall. And I did not end up having my first drink. I didn't party in college. Again, academics were key. My stepmother was very controlling, so going out and partying with high schoolers was not an option. While friends were partying, I was babysitting or working at my first job. And so that was my high school nerdum of life. College, my first party, frat party, drank, and then habits were okay, normal for college, as anyone else. And ended up, as I said, meeting my husband, starting to date my husband my second year of college. Eventually, we started building a business together. He was out at 16, so we were both very similar in knowing what it was like to be in survival mode from 16 to 17 years old, and in that self-sufficiency mode where you learn how to take care of yourself. And for me, in my life, doing basically the opposite of what my parents did, was the pillars of what not to do. And it served me very well for a very long time. I was one of the first people in my family, since my great-grandfather, to make it through college, actually through high school without getting pregnant, through college, then graduating, then getting a job, then getting married, then getting a house, then having a kid. Only because of God at this point. And I'll get to that later on in the story. The addiction part of it, I was very much self-sufficient. I knew how to, as I've said, problem solve, move through life, do what needs to get done. If it takes 10 jobs, however many jobs it takes, how many hours it takes to get the job done, I'm going to do it. And so my husband and I, he ran a MMA gym at the time. And so I dove right into learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which in the late 90s, early 2000s was unheard of. To compete in MMA was illegal. And so having a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school was way ahead of its time. And so my husband and I built the gym together. He started instructional videos before YouTube, books. And so we helped edit. We self-published. I shipped everything all over the world. We had a huge website and became fairly well-known in that industry. And I ended up getting my teaching job. And so I had the steady income and he had the business. And when we started dating, it's like, all right, this is family business. We do this together. And so having been raised that way, it was like a duck to the pond. I went right to it. It was just second nature to me. And so we went from, I taught in the morning, left work, went right into teaching at the gym. And we went from basically being homeless in our early life together, sleeping on the office floor and showering in my dorm, to 6 figures in less than a year. We went from broke kids to doing very well at the time. And our parents were not really super present in our lives. We made a lot of mistakes, but our drive was proving everyone wrong and running from poverty as fast as humanly possible. And as soon as I met my husband, I decided, all right, this doesn't match. I'm this overweight, pudgy girl dating a very attractive, very in shape man who runs a fitness gym, and ended up losing weight, about 50 pounds within the first 6 months of dating him. And I got introduced to bodybuilders and nutrition, and that was the beginning of really learning about nutrition and being up on the newest trends well before they were mainstream. And I've learned so much from the individuals that I was introduced to, who basically taught me so much of what I know today. And diving into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for me, I'm somewhat of a girly girl, but not. I love football. I love grappling. And so diving into that sport was, again, kind of second nature. It was so much fun. And building that was an amazing outlet. And with all the different emotions going through, not seeing my mother for most of my life, feeling that abandonment, there were a lot of wounds that I felt I needed to fill. By the time I was 20, 21, I reunited with my mom, cut ties with my parents, and my husband and I planned on getting married, creating new boundaries. We paid for our own wedding, and my mom ended up walking me down the aisle, and have been reconciling with her since then. And again, my husband and I built our industry together, ended up moving into our first house, having a beautiful daughter. And unfortunately, through all of this, in college, my drinking was fairly normal compared to other college kids. But after college ended, my behavior kept going as if I was still in college, and worse. Lots of insane episodes. And I did not know I didn't have an off button. I thought I could control it. And there was a point at which where once I went to a certain point, there was no off except for basically passing out. And there was a point at which where I realized if I'm going to have a kid, I needed to put this down and really focus on taking care of my body. And so I put down the drink essentially for 4 years while we tried to have our daughter, got pregnant, and didn't drink for the time trying to having her till she was about 2 or so years old. And again, through all of this, because of feeling less than, my husband and I are chasing everything on paper to prove that we're worth something. Everything in the world, how much is in our bank account, what kind of cars we drove. Everything was about creating the worldly perception that we had made it and that we were worth something. And to a degree, the more we succeeded, the more people seemed to love us. And that created a kind of self-love or sense of love for ourselves, but still feeling empty and chasing titles. After having my daughter, I was like, okay, great. Now that I've got my master's degree, I've got my tenure in teaching. Now what? I was always looking for the next goal before I finished the one that I was at. I could see it in sight and move to the next one. And so I got involved in Mrs. pageants. And so I became Mrs. New York, a first runner-up a few other times, and finally became Mrs. New York and first run-up to Mrs. US Globe, fourth place, second or first runner-up, as they say, to Mrs. North America by 2010, and getting titles. I was able to retire from teaching, actually being able to effectively leave that job in 2010 because mixed martial arts was becoming so much more popular. I was able to leave that job and work full time at the business, being my own boss, which when you pick up the drink again, which I did after 4 years, I make my own rules, I make my own hours, and no one could tell me what I could or couldn't do. And we had multiple gyms and enabled, and regardless of how much I drank, I was still successful and continued to build our empire. Went from 75 students to 400 overnight. We got to the point where we were able to semi-retire to Southwest Florida, where we've been for the past 13 years, and leaving New York behind us. Unfortunately, though, a month after moving down here, I got rear-ended. And that was a point at which I ended up with nerve damage in my hip. I've done a lot to rebuild my body back and strength and mind, body, and spirit throughout. But at that moment where there was a yellow light, I decided to stop. My knee was on the console. A girl was texting and driving, rear-ended us, and all bets were off from that point forward. And God decided to take everything from me that I thought made me on paper, that I had been striving for, every title, every accomplishment, and brought me back down to just me and forced me to look at myself. And being in Southwest Florida, having access to alcohol literally everywhere, it began the downward spiral to my bottom. Once we finally moved into our home that we bought after moving down here, we had a hard time settling into suburbia. In upstate New York, if you're familiar, there are no street lights, no sidewalks. You're pretty far from your neighbors, at least where we lived. And it was fairly isolated. So it was really just us. Here, your neighbors are really close, like they were when I grew up in California. And people are knocking on the door and trying to introduce themselves. It was a major culture shock. And so all of us coming down here, I was like, oh, my husband really needs help kind of adjusting to suburbia. So I'm like, okay, you go to two places to get help. So you either go to a therapist or you go to church. And he grew up Catholic. I grew up really more spiritual than anything else. I went to church as a little kid with my grandparents. But I'm like, all right, so we'll find therapy first. We'll look for a therapist. So I ended up signing us up for a therapist. We go a few times, and then she asks me to come by myself. And so I go, okay, sure. So I come in, and I'm thinking, we're going to set up a plan for how to fix my husband. Right. Got it. Okay. Thinking I'm going to have my notebook. We're going to set this plan in motion. And the session was about me. So, Heather, do you think you might have a drinking problem? And I said, no. I have a consumption problem. If I can control my drinking like I've learned to control eating ice cream, I'll be just fine. Now, mind you, at this time, I dropped all the weight, got in shape. I was Mrs. New York, standing on a stage in a bathing suit. It's like I put it down for competitions. I can do this. This is not a problem. I'll just shift gears and do it again. So basically, it was the last time I ever saw her. You could see a cloud of smoke in the shape of Heather out the door, and I never went back. Luckily, that's not the end of my story. Because while we came down here, the one thing I couldn't understand was how I could have everything, a beautiful house, beautiful daughter, a husband, semi-retired in my early 30s, and living in paradise. Literally, I couldn't have imagined living in a house with an in-ground pool, palm trees everywhere, sunshine every day. This was literally the mecca of where I couldn't imagine my life would have ended up from where I started. And I was suicidal. I literally had everything in front of me and I couldn't live with myself. I was depressed and couldn't stop drinking, didn't know why. How could I have everything and just be so miserable? And so the therapist knew what was wrong. I was not accepting of it. And so I'm like, okay, fine, then we'll go to church. We need community. We're down here alone. We have no family. Let's go to church. And because my husband grew up in church, choir loft, his father played the organ. Although Catholic, we call him a recovering Catholic. We're like, okay, fine. Non-denominational, that sounds about right. So we start Googling and we found the church that we are still a part of now, where now my husband is the lead pastor and I'm the pastor's wife, which is one of the most ironic things, again, I would have ever thought would have happened to me from where I came from. When we talk about judgment, that was one of the things that turned me off from religion the majority of my life, was being judged by people who didn't know me. How dare you tell me how to live when you don't have your stuff together and you call yourself a Christian and you do blah, 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 blah. And so I really didn't have a lot of good examples of what a good or proper Christian looked like by any means. A few friends along the way who planted seeds, but for the most part, definitely not. The closest thing I came to it was a youth group trip in Lake Tahoe, where at 14, we were in a prayer circle. I remember sitting there in prayer and feeling enveloped by the Holy Spirit for the first time and in awe. It was just, I still remember the moment today, quite frankly. It just still gives me goosebumps. I remember what I'm wearing. I remember where I was in the room as if it were yesterday, literally 30 years ago. And I found Jesus. I was like, I came home. My stepmother was like, how? No, you're not. You're not going to become some Bible-thumping, kumbaya, Jesus-loving girl. And at 14, looking back, that would have been one of the best things that ever happened to me, was to find the love of Christ instead of looking for love in all the wrong places. God had a different journey for me. But at that moment, it was definitely a seed that took root and just took a lot longer to come to fruition. But here we are, found a church and met some amazing people and some of the first sober women I ever encountered in my life. First of all, we went to what they called an embrace group or life groups, whatever you call them now. Every church has a different name for them. And two women were talking about being sober and were smiling and laughing about it. And it took me by surprise because, as I said, judgment nearly killed me. You were too pretty. I built up such an amazing facade. You can't tell me I have problems. I tried to find everything to keep people from thinking I had problems. Every handbag, shoes, booze, name brand cars, whatever it took to keep you far enough away from me at arm's length to not get to know the real me. I'm fine. Everything's perfect. Leave me alone. I'm great. And this was the first time in my life I ever heard someone talk about being happy about not drinking or being in recovery. And it just stopped me in my tracks. And lucky for me, God put me in the right place, because those are the women that I turned to when I kept spiraling and being retired and having too much time on my hands and more than enough money. I just kept drinking and didn't know why. And so I went to them. It took me quite some time, honestly, to finally get it. I got my Bible, went to my first meeting, met with my pastor, my husband, and said, yep, I got my coin, I've got my Bible, leave me alone. And it actually took at least a year from there till I finally hit bottom, where I was driving home and I couldn't stop past a place that sold alcohol without picking it up. And I remember getting home, and my husband and I are best friends, and he couldn't talk to me anymore. And the brink of which I realized I can't keep doing this anymore. I finally hit my knees and asked for help. Because prior to that, there was no way. Everyone kept saying, are you sure you're not an alcoholic? And in my mind, the stigma was some toothless guy in a trench coat under a bridge drinking out of a brown paper bag. And that's where that judgment literally nearly killed me. I had been putting forward this front for so long to polish my outside appearance, to keep people from getting to know the real me, and people judging me and me judging myself, to getting the help that I needed and finally surrendering. And the biggest problem I had prior to asking for help is I was so self-sufficient from parenting myself. I had to buy my own shampoo and supplies and clothes for school once I was babysitting, basically parenting myself from the time I was 14 up. And so for me, I had broken every other chain in my family. Why can't I do this too? There was no reason why this wasn't in the line of things, why I couldn't control. Well, I could stop for a couple months. Why not now? And thank God for the people in the Fellowship of Recovery that showed me that it's a disease and you cannot do it alone. You have to ask God for help. And that is the moment at which, thank God, April 30th, 2014, I got on my knees and asked God to finally remove this from me, because regardless of how anyone looks on the outside, regardless of how much stuff they have, what accomplishments they have, it doesn't discriminate. And you can see that. So many celebrities, people who you think have all their stuff together, mental illness is mental illness. It doesn't care what you look like. It doesn't care what your family name is. It doesn't care if you're in jail or Yale. It does not discriminate. It gets you when it gets you. It is a mental illness. It is genetic. I didn't realize that my parents both struggle with it. My dad is, thank God, now in recovery in his own journey, which is a beautiful and reconciliation to watch. We've been on our own journey. That'll be a whole separate story right there. Lots to go through. But the one thing that I've learned in this journey is how judging someone from the outside, it's so typical to say, don't judge a book by its cover, but it has taught me so much that regardless of what someone puts out on the outside, you don't know what's going on the inside. And it has taught me so much about putting myself in someone else's shoes and looking at the lens through their world and what they went through. They don't realize what I went through, that I was overweight, that I have been suicidal, that I've been severely depressed, and so many different things that I've had to go through, from literally having every statistic against me that I should fail in life and succeeding despite my circumstances. That judgment and the self-evaluation and thinking that I was somehow better than, or that how could someone like me, who has all the things that I have this problem? And when you can cut through the judgment, you can get to the root of the problem. And that is what I'm here to help, share my message. This is the beginning of our journey together, your journey with me. And I really am so passionate. This has been something for 20 years, since I was 25. I remember sitting in the classroom I was teaching in and really feeling a fire of, how do I help empower women? How do I help women overcome the things that I've overcome? And first of all, I had to heal it in myself. I had to learn to trust other women, and I had to learn how to build my own network of women who I could trust. And that is what my journey is here for. This is what my new passion and purpose in life is to build a community. And I wish I already have, and I'm so blessed to be able to bring this forward and to bring so many other women into this, to learn to love one another, so you love yourself, to see yourself for as beautiful as you are on the inside as you are on the outside, to see yourself for who you really are, regardless of what the mirror says. The scale is a number, looking at data and truly cleaning yourself out, because you're worth it, because you're loved, because you're unique, and luckily not so unique that we can't help you and we can't help each other, because life is life. We don't all get here on a winning lottery ticket. No one gets through this unscathed. We all have issues. We've all had stuff that we've gone through. And being able to take my mess and make it my message, and to help empower other women and the tools that I've learned in problem solving help other women unlock their self-worth and heal the wounds of their past so that they can move forward and be the best version of themselves, wholly, truly, and genuinely and authentically. Because I know when I was trying to be all those different people, it was exhausting because I had to be a certain person at work when I was a teacher, then at the gym, the black belt's wife, the entrepreneur. Well, oh, she's so mean because she's a business owner and, she's a bitch or this. And, walking through judgment and, being hated on or whatever the case was. And just putting on so many different facades and masks, depending on what environment I was in, to finally putting them all down and getting over the fear of letting everyone see me for who I really am as a recovering addict, as a broken human being, as someone who has had to ask for help, who has surrendered to God, who has had to transform their lives more times than I can count. But because I've been humbled to ask for help and have had the beautiful blessing and opportunity to be able to help others, is a journey that I'm so humbled and blessed to be, for anyone to ask me to be a part of their lives to help. And because I know what it takes to do that, because I've been there myself. The last thing I ever wanted to do was ask for help because I got it. I'm an I got it girl. I can carry that case of water. I can carry all my groceries in one trip. Thank you, Instacart. I don't have to do that anymore. But being humbled physically, mentally, spiritually, and learning how to put it all back together again is my new passion in life, because I chased after weight loss, then mental health, and then spiritual, and finally getting to the point where once I learned how to put them all together at the same time, real change and real permanent change stayed. There was less roller coasters, more consistency, working on my marriage, being middle-aged, dealing with perimenopause, the hormonal changes, raising a daughter into adulthood in this modern, chaotic world, not having a mother figure myself and being that for her, and all of the trials that life throws at us. And so my passion now is sharing all of the things that I've had to figure out on my own to help create a map and have all of us as women truly help each other out instead of knocking each other down, not competing with one another, but competing in life with one another, encouraging and lifting each other up, is such a more beautiful life to live than alone and isolated. And I know most of us have experienced that. COVID put us all, in an isolationist mindset, perpetuating and speeding up most mental illnesses. That now is a time more than ever, coming out of that, rebuilding and healing from those wounds, and really truly being able to build a healthy, non-toxic community, both in all ways. Toxic, whether it's your nutrition, wellness, food, our environment, time efficiency. There's so many things that make up living a balanced life. And it wasn't easy getting here, but I've learned how to simplify it. And so I would be so blessed if you would subscribe to my channel and join me on this journey. If you know someone or you are someone who can benefit from me coaching and walking you through this program, speeding you up on that feeling whole as a person and bringing all those things together to finally feel balanced and less chaotic, less overwhelmed, from being overwhelmed to optimized, and kind of learning how to clean up your mess and putting it all together and owning it and walking tall and confident and being a part of a community. I would so much love for you to join me and the women that I've been working with on this journey together as we do this thing called life, because it's not easy, but it's easier when you have the help and the love of those around you who truly care about you as you are as a human. And having God and my ministry family around me, my fellowship, and learning how to live life one day at a time has been a truly transformative experience that I hope I can share and inspire others to come along with on their journey. It may not be with me, and even if this is the only thing you ever watch and you find someone else to do it, I hope I'm that mustard seed then, that seed that gets planted, that gets you motivated enough to go, you know what? Today's the day. Instead of one day, that one day is today. Make that today. So follow me, subscribe, join me, join my challenges, and I really hope to see you along this journey with me as we build a women empowering women community, living the best versions of ourselves because we deserve it. It's time. It's time to conquer the world. It's time to lift each other up. It's time to take back our lives and live wholeheartedly in a most balanced way that we can, and together with the help from one another. So God bless you, and I'll see you next time.